Hi. I don't know if you're still there or not, to the extent that you were there in the first place, but we had your basic outage just of long enough duration to knock us off the air. So we're back, and if I'm not mistaken, I was chattering about the very interesting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I'm trying to find. Here we go. Yeah, the grief and pain that apparently her call for the left caucus of the future generated. Not inducing much enthusiasm inside the party at the moment. But again, it's just paralysis. The paralysis that's been induced by a gradually barbarizing propensity over on the right side, to the point where there isn't a Republican Party anymore that can be described without reference to El Caudillo there in, well, the White House or Mar-a-Lago, depending, or the place in Jersey or the place in Scotland, or wherever he goes to charge the American people for his upkeep additional to what is already paid, and then it gets back to him. Emoluments much? Anyway, it's not a popular idea among the progressives, who are quite sure that it's suicide. But again, the 15 million people who have never voted before, why would you think they're going to vote? You might somewhat reasonably ask. I'd like to imagine that the old answers, conservatives, they love old answers. Maybe we could try them from time to time, because they see something conducive to their interests. The rent is too damn high. You know that. Go to the doctor. How easy is that if you don't have employer-provided health care? Without the ACA, it's ruinous. Even with the ACA, you have a plan which, if you're like me, when I had it, interesting story, I had something mediated through Kaiser for a while because I was an artist, and I had a platinum plan for, I want to say 2 years, maybe 3, during which we were all encouraged, get well now, on the assumption that you might not have any care thereafter. I got lucky, and I got on to the ACA right at the point that my Kaiser business was phased. It came to an end. It was administered through a community arts program, which I want in Atlanta, the name of which I believe was C4. I haven't been in contact with them myself for a long time. Might have been C5. I think it was C4. It was like the explosive. And art doesn't blow up mostly, so I guess that was their little joke. Or it is a surrogate for things blowing up, which I believe we can all assume is better. But I got health insurance chiefly for one reason, so every 6 months or so I could go to a physician and have my hypertension meds re-upped, because they just don't cut you a lifetime prescription for those things, no matter how generic they are, and say, oh boom, well you're good. No, you have to spend the, I guess, $100 or whatever the MSRP of a straight up doc I need for you to write me a script visit is these days. Some doctors will actually just do it, I'm given to understand, but they are fewer and fewer because of the nature of the malpractice regime, which is itself based on the private insurance regime. Seems like I would be willing to let a lot of my rights as a patient, in the context of suing for malpractice over many things that could very well, not always, I know this isn't so, but I know there are things that are sued over that are more often than not just a function of a slightly bad decision made in the context of a not entirely predictable condition. Now, if I knew I could go to the doctor for free, I would be sort of inclined to say, well, go ahead, just don't hurt me. Beyond, slipping up and letting me die. But, little details. But, I don't even know where I was going with that. I have so many things passing through my head with this. This is a gigantic proposition, the political regime of the United States. Freedom is fabulous in some senses, but it does, in America, partake of the problem that we have 90 different pairs of socks to choose from. The paralysis of choice that many have written about tends to kick in after a certain point. While I'm talking, I have 6,000 things to choose from. But just to get back on to Ocasio-Cortez, the hyperventilating and feigning couch diving that's been occasioned by her floating the proposition that maybe those with left interests should club together in the House and try to advance social democratic or democratic socialist or whatever labels. And incidentally, let me beat a hobby horse here on the matter of what you call all this left stuff. I'm going to go back to the general welfare manifesto, and let's see, general welfare supports the provision by all available means, private or public or in combination, of healthcare, education, housing, and income support / augmentation as primary and indefeasible social goods. I really want to emphasize that all available means angle. I have some notions about the means of production, and the one thing I will bring forth about it that is really vivid to me, the rest of it's just kind of ancillary and vague, but there's one thing I know, and it's that the primary means of production in this epoch is money. If you have money, you can do anything. You can go to the doctor. You can put a Tesla into interplanetary space. You can have a big ass boat and go watch the Bahrain Grand Prix. You can do lots of things. And all I'm asking is for the financial class, the fire sector class. The innovator class is an interesting bunch of people because they overlap with the fire sector. Some of them are co-optable, some are not. They can't do their work without the fire sector, so everyone starts to get cozy fairly on in the career of a good idea. I don't mind those who trade in money having a little bit of that which they trade in stick to their fingers, which means that of necessity they're going to have more money than everybody else does. Practically. You know, the guy who invents cold fusion or fixes it so we live forever, which incidentally, in the event, you won't be able to charge for. Just think about it. It's a matter of indifference to me how that healthcare gets to the people. But it has to be guaranteed as getting to them. Here's some heresy talk, although not among the Ocasio-Cortezes of the world and most of my friends. I actually do believe in entitlements. That's basically what this says. That's why it says free stuff and no war. So why shouldn't I just get in the face of those who disagree ab initio, who demur against the entire premise in the first place? It's like, yeah, hell yeah, you're entitled. Do you have 2 legs and a human brain and a human genome? Congratulations! You can go to the doctor. It's pretty simple. But I don't care what the mechanism is. If a concordat is agreed to with, the private sector, where yes, we will provide health care for every employed person. Ironclad, and we pay huge fines if we don't. Something like that. I'm not proposing that as a solution. I'm simply saying I want people to go to the doctor. I want them to have a roof over their heads. I want them to have a little walking around money, and I want them to have a little bit of dignity, at least with respect to the basic structures of society. I don't want people to be in a position to be bereft of just the fundamentals. And I don't care how it gets accomplished. The means of production is basically, I think it's a dead letter. I think certain aspects of the 20th century labor movement are de facto a dead letter. As a matter of fact, I would like to ask certain of my friends who are strong advocates of the labor movement, and I am in principle an advocate of labor in its traditional configuration, but labor depended in great measure, and I know there's SEIU, which incidentally I believe got hamstrung by the High Court recently, or certainly damaged badly, but labor always depended upon manufacturers. Manufacturers there will be in the future, but they're not going to be as they were. And I'm just wondering that if it might not be time to be thinking along the lines of whether a social goods regime that guaranteed a baseline, and a decent baseline, and thereby made labor of whatever sort, service, manufacturing, in and of itself more valuable and liberated from the whims of private interests. That's one of the reasons I object to charity. And I'm not the only person to have this criticism, as the Jacobin runs one about once every, 20 minutes, seems like. charity is all well, understood in its, demotic sense, not theologically speaking. Caritas is a different matter altogether, although demotic charity is folded into it to some degree. But it is capricious. You may get it, you may not. Some dentists in Atlanta, I'm sure this is not uncommon, once a year get together to do what they can for as many people as they can accommodate on a weekend day or the entire weekend or whatever. Extractions, whatever they can do in that compass of time. But, if you get in the line 10 minutes too late, or you show up for it 10 minutes too late, well, maybe next year. Maybe you won't have died of an infection from an impacted tooth in that 12-month. Good luck to you. Buona fortuna. How this can be an acceptable state of affairs for any human being is just beyond me. I do not understand the cruelty that people have had to be trained up to. I'm not saying children are angels, but their sense of fairness is at least that of a dog, and I can promise you, not only as a result of anecdotal observation, but now of research, a dog knows when it's getting screwed. That other dog gets more treats than it does. That dog will know. How much more so for a human? Honestly. It's orders of magnitude worse to have to absorb that. But, and in the matter of all the young democratic socialist firebrands and everybody else, and I'm dwelling on this because of the socialism. Socialism has traditionally depended on a really stringent analysis of who owned the means of production. I make an argument that in the Franklin letter to Morris, he refers to the people's right to, as it is put in fairly technical 18th century language, regulate dissents. That right there, if anyone had taken it seriously, and actually for a lot of the early history of the Republic it was taken seriously, that's just a full-bore warrant for an inheritance tax. As I read it. If I'm wrong, let me know, but I don't think so. And I believe, generally speaking, modern analyses of money as dynamic were not available at the time, so to impose them thoroughgoingly on Franklin's model is, I'll say, disingenuous and let myself off the hook. But the kernel of the idea is there. There was obviously the case that there is a desire to make sure that substance was not concentrated in too few hands. It was considered deleterious to the discipline of society that many should, or too many, should have inherited wealth. It was considered corrosive of character, particularly of Republican character, small r. I don't know that that's so. I think it'd be perfectly possible to inherit huge amounts of money after the estate tax, or whatever means of regulating dissents the people of our era and later might decide to impose. But it is certainly the case that civic character and civic virtue on the part of those who have much has been woefully eroded since certainly 1980, when the current hegemonic republicanism with intermittent interruptions of the march. It seems to me that things have gone downhill in terms of the sense of the human being's responsibility to her or his or their fellow human. So here we go. We have, on the one hand, a kind of general sense ranging from fairly theoretical to really just emotive, and almost exclusively in the Democratic Party and some independents who are probably just Democrats who, for one reason or another, just won't say the word because they sort of can't bring themselves to ally themselves with something liberal, which has been shown to be, again, about as bad as communist or can't. Even though if you go issue by issue by issue by issue, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I want that. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'd like that. But oh God forbid that I should be known as anything but a conservative." Conserving what? Conserving starting from when? When's your baseline? When do you start counting? What golden age threshold do you establish that everything else is a departure from? I mean, honestly, does that make any sense? I mean, we're not Hesiod, for heaven's sake. You know, it's just not. We can't make policy on an implicit theogony. Anyway, socialism, related to society, has in it the word social, and I would propose that sticking with that social is a pretty good strategy, because we got a town in Georgia called Social Circle. Apparently they thought that was a good thing. By and large, polite society is considered a good thing. One can imagine a society that was polite. One can imagine a democracy full of noblemen. Now, that's an interesting thing. Democracy actually requires not common people, but noble people. Noblemen and noblewomen. It requires people who have a capacity for noblesse oblige, for an ability to yield place, to be concerned with their fellows as if they were their charges. It's rather like the situation Orwell described when the Republic of Catalonia was established during the Spanish Civil War. A very brief episode, very brief and very sad. Everyone referred one to the other in the formal. Everyone was a person of substance. Sort of the opposite of the Quakers, who insisted upon using nothing but the informal when they spoke to one another. I don't know, I yield to no one in my admiration for the Society of Friends, but I wonder, in the event, if that was, from a socio-political standpoint, a model to be followed. Maybe a sense of a nobility, really, is required to run a democracy properly. To be willing to be generous as a matter of duty. Maybe. Anyway, so social thought. this is my recommendation for what we ought to call it. We should be adherents of social thought. We should be people who are concerned with the aggregate as the substrate from which our individualities arise. It's a stupid argument to be on one pole or the other of the individuality collectivity dispute. Human culture doesn't work that way. There is a door you close, and on one side of that door is the private, and on the other side is the collective. But the collective is not completely absent from the inside of your house. Certainly not in a modern socio-cultural, socio-political regime. I can't beat my spouse anymore. Maybe 50 years ago, in some jurisdictions in the United States, I could have, within limits. Or rape of a spouse considered an oxymoron in a lot of these United States up until as recently as a couple or 3 decades ago, encoded into law as a basically an impossibility. How could that happen? You have rights. Well, no, you don't. And the collective comes to address you in your house, Mr. Man, and tells you, no, you can't. That imposition is forbidden now by society. On the other hand, on the other side of the door, do I have to obey the traffic laws? I can't drive in the middle of the street, obviously, but I can go where I want to, again within limits, and I have some ideas about those limits too, particularly the ones involving the ingestion of neurologically active substances and paying for sex. I think I've learned prudishness from Rachel Maddow. But she's merely very proper. I love her to death. It's a ridiculous argument. And we live in a social regime. There's give, there's take. Sometimes in society it will be required that the individual fall back more on his, her, their resources and less on the organization of society generally for reasons. Actually, I can't imagine reasons of a disaster that would occasion it, because it seems that disaster tends to produce conditions under which collective organization is more necessary. The taxation, the Georgia primary runoff is an amazing thing, to the extent that the Republican, there basically are. I've seen an ad for one candidate on the Democratic side, a House race, where one candidate is basically calling the other the worst thing I can call them, Republican, at least in program, propensities of program. And the Republican side is just astonishingly vicious. It's just really something to see. If you want to see just individuality, atomism, just run wild, and the viciousness it occasions, just look there. You'll see some truly interesting, truly nasty things. The Kemp Cagle business, I think, probably takes the cake right now. I'd like to point out something I have observed is that there is a strange fixation in the Cagle camp with using body doubles for Brian Kemp. The first ad was the old dude with the shotgun, another gun. They have to have guns. It's talismanic for them, evidently, at this stage. But body double for Brian Kemp, while this old guy's reading him the riot act for stiffing all them farmers on that 2 million, 2.5 million, something, maybe 22 million, I don't remember. Lots of money, more than I'll ever see. Although it's probably spread out over 20 guys, so who knows. So he runs the Brian Kemp body double off the porch. Then there's the massage body double ad, which is disturbing because there is an obvious intent. It's obvious to me to somehow or other connect Kemp with the homoerotic. Particular aspects of how the bathrobe sash is drawn together after the money is tucked into the pocket. It's just creepy. The whole campaign is creepy. It's, I would say, the antithesis of social thought. It's anti-social. It's just the war of all against all, even among each other. And incidentally, David Schaefer, congrats for the sneeringly horrified tone of voice you use when you say radical left agenda, which y'all are supposed to be fighting instead of each other, or so you say. Hoo-hoo, boy, that's something. Anyway, there's no social thought going on there, nor are there issues being addressed such as property taxes, which is what put me in mind of this, because I believe I saw some ad where what's the guy's name, Duncan or something, I think he's running for insurance commissioner. I don't know, I can't keep them straight. They're all white guys. I can't tell them apart. It's alleged that he raised hunting and fishing fellers' taxes. Now, I don't know the details of this, but beans to buttons, what that translates to is they just had to raise fees. I worked at a hunting and fishing, or hooks and bullets, as we like to say, publishing house for 12 years and change at one point in my life, and the amount of money involved in running a fish and wildlife service, particularly the mere oversight of the venatory and the piscatory, it ain't cheap, and general wealth. Oops. Freudian slip. General revenues don't cover that much of it. A lot of it actually is covered through licensure fees. I don't doubt that this guy probably oversaw in his legislative committee or whatever a fairly normal increase in the fees. Ergo, taxation. By the time you get to the ad, it's they raised your taxes. Well, yeah, inflation happened. So I guess they managed to just about keep up with it. Anyway, it managed to keep up with it. It's just the sort of thing you see over and over and over again in their political universe. The idea of collective action just doesn't occur to them. But anyway, taxes. The Atlanta Metro has seen a spate of new assessments on housing, on residential housing, and everyone's head is exploding after their hair has caught on fire because the increases are gigantic in some cases. They're furious. Apparently the homestead exemption features of the taxation regime and other such mechanisms don't adequately alleviate the whatever suffering more or less regular middle class people are experiencing as a result of these increases. I don't hear Republican candidates and really bringing up the topic of why those increases are so pronounced, which in the metro, and particularly in Atlanta proper, Atlanta Fulton County, are driven by speculation. These properties are assessed, at least in some measure, on what the traffic will bear out in the market. And again, homestead exemptions and the like compensate for it to some degree, but the sticker shock is pretty high, apparently. And again, a lot of it is just people being allergic to taxes. They're convinced. This is in the Franklin letter. He actually brings up the "but it's our money" thing. They've been saying that since 1790. It's our money. And Franklin's sort of pointed out, well, A, the money that's being used to pay debt already contracted by the government, like in creating a government, it's not your money by definition because we owe it. And furthermore, money comes from society. He doesn't say that in so many words. You can say I've read things into that, but that's what I read in it. That society, it's why the people have the right, again, of regulating dissents. They can make the determination as to who exactly is going to get all of that money. They can parse it out depending upon their view of the social requirements of money itself. But social thought brought to bear on the issue of property taxes might do away with property taxes altogether, might decide that in a well-regulated republic, society at large for the entire nation should take over education. Oh dear, local standards won't be observed. Oh my. Unelected bureaucrats in Washington will decide what to learn about Pliny and Tocqueville and Soroyan and, all that math stuff that I frankly don't care about. But that is important, particularly for those who have propensities that way. They need to be encouraged mightily and early. And if they get, I don't know. I don't want to go into the pedagogical stuff right now. I have a whole massive bugaboo about that. But the social thought brought to bear on this whole property tax issue, it would be the case that as a primary axiom will be the obvious fact that people do not buy their primary residences as investment vehicles. Or at least they didn't used to before the fiscalization of American life began. We're going to talk about that book by the late Joe Nocera one of these days. Because I remember hearing this concept of every man his own investment banker back in the late 80s or whatever it was. I was just like, no, you don't want that. That will end up badly, which it certainly did in 2008 when it came to its logical fruition. But the social dimension of owning a house has at least to have parity, with the quantifiable issues of just money value, valuation, worth from a financial standpoint, although so much conflated with individual, personal, spiritual, pneumatic worth. dangerously so. Um, we can't know at any given moment what the proper proportions for the individual regime and the public regime should be. I think absent compelling circumstances in the material, social, political, real world, parity ought to be the default state. You can't not take into consideration what's required. Again, how do you fund the schools? I'm absolutely sure local property taxation is the worst possible system, which is why I'm an advocate of nationalization of a public system and institution of proper guidelines which will take into account both the quantificationist and letristic ends of the business. But I'm bringing up social thought. Again, it's not a label I'm wedded to. I like it. I think it's capacious. It doesn't tie anyone to a particular avenue of approach forever, but it does acknowledge up front that the social dimension has to be factored in to every decision. It can't be just coin tossed, except in the case of emergencies, which then would have to be agreed upon either on the fly or by arrangements made previously. That would vary from situation to situation. The word socialism is probably a non-starter. It's probably going to continue to be a non-starter, even with the young. I'd like to see it not be the case because I don't think it necessarily requires its old definition, but I would also argue if you have to engage in so much in the way of rhetorical gymnastics to render palatable a particular term, why not try to salvage from it what you can that's valuable and not worrisome? I think it's foolish to be worrisome about socialism, given how vague everyone's use of the term is. But it's there, and if there's any tactic I would recommend to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her allies and Epigones, and I number myself among them. I wish her and her ilk great success and a burgeoning of numbers that will discomfit the other side just horrifically by 2020. I hope so. I'm just suggesting that it might be a little easier on everybody concerned if the social part got kept and the ism got jettisoned. That's about it. That's all I got. Anyway, this is the end of episode 3.1 because of the power thing. The show will be archived separately in 2 bits or not. I'm not exactly sure. If you're seeing this afterwards, I didn't put the graphic up for it, but if you search general welfare on GoFundMe, you will find an interesting little page that suggests that you give us money. We could use it. We need more plant. Got to work up a nice little corner over here to where I can sit actual live bodies down for interviews, etc., etc. And hopefully we'll get enough buzz on this where people will Skype in and try to give me grief for an hour, which we're omitting in this as in the first episode because we're not really set up for it yet. But that is, again, 18 July 2018, the General Welfare Tendency on YouTube. We're working on it, and we'll keep at it. Until next Wednesday, I'm Kevin McFoy Dunn. Bye.